So, if your competitors aren't just companies that look like you do, how should businesses be really thinking about the competition?
I think it's a really good question, Kat, actually, because this type of conversation, I think, comes up a lot. It comes up really regularly I think particularly when we're working with more niche businesses or maybe preclinical businesses where they often talk about having a really unique proposition, and they feel like the services that they offer, the technology that they have is really unique to them. But that's not to say that you don't have to be mindful of the competition that's out there in the marketplace, because businesses are fighting for customers. Even if they offer something slightly different, they're going to be looking for traction with new prospects and new business development opportunities. So I think when we first talk to clients, we ask the question, can you tell us a little bit about your competitors? And quite often we do get a reaction, or we do hear, we don't really have any defined competitors that offer what we do. We've just had this quite recently, actually, Lindsay, haven't we, with one of our clients? I don't know if you want to go into a little bit of detail around kind of that conversation that we had.
There's a company that specialises in 3D printing, and their main problem that they're solving is kind of around solubility challenges and just kind of general formulation development challenges. So if they were kind of looking narrowly at the competitor set, they might just be looking at other kind of companies with 3D printing technology. But really they should be looking broader than that, and which they are, at more traditional CDMOs that are solving those formulation challenges in different ways. So often we do try and, as Kat mentioned earlier, like segment competitor types into different buckets, because you've got the ones that are more in your kind of niche, and then you've got ones that are solving customer problems in different ways. But yeah, Trev, I don't know if you can think of any other ways that hidden competitors can sometimes exist.
Yeah, I've just one's just sprung into my mind, actually. We've been working with a client of ours, and like their sales cycle, it can take up to 2 years from start to finish, and they work on like the packaging side of things. And so we're talking about like supply chain, and nobody wants to interrupt supply chain because of the cost implications and everything else that goes with that. So they've had a real challenge whereby they're not actually necessarily focusing on direct competition. They're focusing on how they can influence the buyers and the decision makers, which in this case are like certain types of engineers, certain types of people within operations, etc., etc. And it's actually trying to give them the value of change before they're actually at a stage where they're considering their options when it comes to suppliers. And that's a really difficult thing. There's that old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so even though there are reasons as to why a company should maybe change a packaging supplier, for example, the amount of effort it takes to do that almost is a blocker. And so you kind of got to think about that in lots of different ways. So sometimes it's definitely not just direct competition who supply the same thing. It's actually more about influencing the buyers. That is the bit that's going to kind of get you some traction. And so you have to think about things in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because in the pharma industry, I don't think anyone really wants to be the first necessarily at trying a new way of doing things. So it's how do you build trust, and how do you kind of reassure buyers that it's the right choice when it might be something that's still quite novel?
Yeah, exactly. I think trust and that credibility piece is so important. So what then helps you to stand out beyond your traditional kind of positioning statements and your messaging, it's all about those case studies. It's all about those customer testimonials. It's all about that interaction with your customers and your buyers. That if you can bring that to the forefront, then actually that's what starts to kind of interject some sort of response, which is kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at purely at the sort of marketing communications phase, I suppose.
I would say definitely think beyond what you would see as direct or indirect competitors. Get some external perspectives, help work with someone who can help you to really map and understand the whole landscape. I think often when you're in businesses and you're kind of doing the do every day, you can become a little bit kind of sort of inadvertently, if you like, narrow-minded, because you really feel like you know what's out there. But there are many occasions, there's a situation even just this week where a client has had kind of a competitor pop up that's now on the top of their radar that really has never played in that category. I think also like make sure you're kind of keeping on top of that as well is obviously critical. But I think your buyers are ultimately at the heart of this, and understanding how they think and make those decisions is really important, because then you can take some learnings from what your competition is doing as well. But you're often competing against not just a name or a different brand. You're competing against, as we've spoken about before, the status quo, internal processes. People don't want to introduce risk, particularly in this industry. So if there's any fear of that, or just fear of change full stop, and what that means if you've got kind of an existing partnership. I think also often people sometimes get to points with existing suppliers where maybe things aren't going swimmingly, but all of those other things that stack up and create those kind of concerns mean they kind of stay put. But I think if you can really start to showcase your brand in the right way, then you can obviously start to convince them that those decisions are worth taking for the right partner. So I think there are forever changing in this industry around technologies, new approaches. So I think certainly just being very, very open-minded and sort of mapping that out. Otherwise, you kind of risk thinking you're completely unique and therefore you're competing alone. And then ultimately your buyers at the heart of that decision know that they've solved these problems before, perhaps, but in different ways. So it's about bringing it back to the center and the customer, I think.
So if a company genuinely believes that it's got no competitors, what risks does that create in terms of commercial growth?
I think it's such an interesting point, because I think people are often thinking about things a little bit in silos when they're kind of trying to go to market or activate. And I think many of these companies are kind of often in an early stage, for example, moving from kind of that startup into that real commercialization phase, or perhaps they're kind of more established, but they're launching new products or moving into a new part of the market or a new geography as well. So I think if they're not really thinking about competition in the kind of truest sense of the word, and almost segmenting the competition sort of across the status quo and doing nothing to kind of more direct or indirect competitors as well, then if you don't think about mapping that whole landscape in detail with a partner who kind of really understands it, it can create a real false sense of security. And I think often it can create the risk that companies are sort of positioning themselves too narrowly, or they're just thinking with the blinkers on. And I think that then can create a problem as you kind of move into that go-to-market or an activation, or if you're building a brand and wanting to kind of really put some power behind it. I think that it can really kind of cause sort of a more limited potential scope, or blind spots, if you like, that then either you're missing an opportunity or you're kind of missing a challenge that might come from that as well. I don't know, Trevor, if you've got any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a really important point there, Kat. I think when choosing to do nothing is the highest risk I think you can take, because choosing to do nothing just means you're maybe stagnant. When there's always companies coming into the market who are wanting to really elevate their position, and they'll be looking at how they can do that, and you've got to be on the front foot, I think, in this industry, particularly in life sciences. If you're not on the front foot and you're evolving, we're talking about commercial growth here, so what you're doing right now is going to be different to what you're doing maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. With AI at the forefront of technology now, things are moving at pace so quickly that you've got to constantly be on that front foot. And so I think there's a high risk that if you genuinely believe there's no competition out there and you sort of don't do anything, that's a real high risk move.
Yeah,
it's so true. And I think like your point there, Trevor, around kind of it becomes a bit inward facing and not customer focused. Like, I think if you can really sort of focus on the customer and how they buy and how they're thinking through those processes as to what your competition looks like, it can help you have so much more of like a joined up strategy, and sort of that messaging and differentiation piece plays in, which I know, Lindsay, is a lot of what you guys focus on.
Yeah, like when we approach brand platforms, we always like to kind of take three things into consideration, which is the buyer needs and pains and motivations, the competitor landscape and how you can differentiate. And then it's also kind of bottling the magic of that company and what makes them, what their strengths are, what makes them special, what their customers value about them. So I think if you're missing one of those three pieces of the puzzle, then the brand platform ultimately is not going to be as kind of powerful or kind of distinctive enough within the market.
When you're working on like strategic phases, Lindsay, do you see a difference between the approach from like a startup or a smaller business versus a global powerhouse when it comes to the belief around competitive landscape and individuality?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I think the startups, obviously, a lot of the time they have more kind of niche specialisms and more kind of novel technologies. So they might be more likely to think that they don't have competition. But then on the other end of the scale, really large players, such as like really large CDMOs, might almost feel slightly invincible in that they're so well established within the sector. But I do find at the minute we work a lot with those mid-size companies that have got one eye on the large competitors who they're often up against in kind of RFP scenarios. And then they've also got their own set of mid-sized competitors that are more like for like and comparable. So I think those mid-sized players are probably the most aware of the competition.
I think when we sometimes talk around competition and competitors, there's sometimes almost like negative connotations to it. You're thinking about what they're doing and you're almost become fixated too much on the competition and not focusing on your own kind of strengths, I suppose, as a business. But do you feel like there should be more of a positive spin when we think about the competitor landscape and competition? Because I suppose there's loads of learnings that our clients can find from competitors.
Yeah, definitely. I do think there's a lot of learnings that can be taken from competitors, especially if you're kind of earlier in your journey as a company. There might be aspirational competitors that you think, actually, I would really like to, in 5 years' time, when I grow up, I'd really like to be more like them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, how can I be different? It can be, how can I kind of maybe emulate some of the things that you like about competitors that you admire, and ultimately try and do it better than them, but not necessarily different. I think that's kind of, there's an example I can think of actually where a client worked within a company and she felt that the customer experience was like really top notch within that company. And then she went and actually set up her own clinical research organization, and the whole kind of culture that she wanted to build there was very much emulating what the previous company was doing from a customer experience point of view. So she almost used that as her inspiration, and obviously there were other things about that company that were unique, so they weren't going to be like for like at all. But yeah, it's an example where you can kind of take learnings from what competitors are doing well and build upon that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good response, that, Lindsay, to be honest with you. Again, because when we think about commercial growth, like you're wanting to you want to maybe emulate, you want to have like an aspiration as to like how you're going to get to that end point. And obviously we've discussed that things constantly change along the way, but that constant learning, that strive for excellence, and that comes from like people and individuals as well. So you take learnings from all those different experiences and you weave them in, and that's kind of what feeds from like an individual perspective commercial growth.
Absolutely. And I think that if we look at kind of bottling the magic, as we've talked about a little bit, of those businesses, you can absolutely, as you've just said, Lindsay, take a learning from a different organisation where you really like what you see. But then I think weave that together, find someone who can help you really bring that to life in a way that's authentically you as a business or as a brand. And then ultimately that's going to help you to drive more commercial growth because you're showing up in the market as genuine, as authentically yourselves, and your messaging and sort of everything else ties in with that. So it gives everyone that commercial confidence and ultimately helps to drive that towards that sort of greater commercial outcome as well.
Just picking up on, obviously search is well established, but AI and GEO does create a lot of opportunity, perhaps for less established companies to get some early traction while companies are kind of still figuring out how best to rank in those types of language platforms. So yeah, I do think there is an opportunity at the minute with AI and GEO, and you might find that you've got kind of different competitors on those types of platforms than what you would expect.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in the work that we do within remarketing, how we have to be forward thinking when it comes to search, because search is a very different kind of operation to what it was even a year or so ago. So yeah, again, going back to sort of previous points we've made, being on the front foot, I think is just really, really important.